Welcome back to another tale of forbidden love and unexpected courage. Today's story will take you to the cold winters of 1820s England, where fear meets love in the most dangerous way. Make sure to stay until the end, because what happens between our Duke and this brave woman will leave you speechless. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to hit that like button. The morning mist hung over Ravenswood Manor like a ghostly veil. Duke Alexander Blackthorne stood at his study window, watching the frozen lake that had haunted his dreams for 23 years. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the window frame. That lake held his darkest secret, his greatest shame. At 31, the Duke was known throughout England as a man of steel, cold, calculating, feared by his enemies and respected by his peers. But what they didn't know was that beneath that iron exterior lived a boy who had never learned to swim, a boy who had nearly drowned at age 8 in that very lake. "Your Grace," came a soft voice behind him. Alexander turned to see Mrs. Whitmore, his elderly housekeeper, enter with his morning tea. "The new governess has arrived for Lady Catherine." Alexander nodded curtly. His 7-year-old daughter, Catherine, needed proper education, and after 3 governesses had quit in as many months, he was running out of options. "Send her to the library, I'll interview her there." But Alexander had no idea that this new governess would change everything. Her name was Miss Eleanor Hayes, and she carried secrets of her own. Eleanor stood in the grand foyer of Ravenswood Manor, trying not to let her jaw drop. She had worked in many fine houses, but nothing compared to this. Marble columns reached toward painted ceilings, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors looked down at her with disapproving eyes. But Eleanor wasn't easily intimidated. She had survived much worse than judgmental paintings. At 24, Eleanor had been forced to work since she was 16. Her father, once a respectable merchant, had lost everything in bad investments. Her mother had died of heartbreak shortly after. Eleanor had learned to be strong, to stand on her own 2 feet. She was also hiding something that could destroy her reputation forever. "Miss Hayes?" Mrs. Whitmore appeared, her kind eyes taking in Eleanor's simple but clean dress. "His Grace will see you now." Eleanor followed the housekeeper through corridors lined with expensive tapestries and gleaming suits of armor. Her heart beat faster with each step. She needed this position desperately. The money she had been sending to the countryside was running low, and if she lost this job, everything she had worked for would be lost. The library doors opened, and Eleanor found herself face to face with the most intimidating man she had ever seen. Duke Alexander Blackthorne was tall and broad-shouldered, with jet-black hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was carved from marble, showing no emotion at all. But for just a moment, when their eyes met, Eleanor saw something flicker in those grey depths. Something that looked almost like loneliness. "Miss Hayes," his voice was deep and controlled. "Your references are impressive, though I notice gaps in your employment history." Eleanor lifted her chin. She had expected this question. "I was caring for my sick aunt in the countryside, Your Grace. Family duty comes first." It was a lie, but a necessary one. The truth was far more complicated and dangerous. Alexander studied her carefully. There was something different about this woman. She didn't lower her eyes like the others. She met his gaze directly, without fear. Her brown hair was pulled back severely, but he could see rebellious curls trying to escape. Her dress was plain, but it couldn't hide her natural grace. "Lady Catherine is—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Spirited. She has driven away 3 governesses in 3 months. Do you think you can handle her?" Eleanor almost smiled. "I believe children act out when they feel unheard. Your Grace, perhaps Lady Catherine simply needs someone to listen." Something in her tone made Alexander look at her more closely. You speak as if you know something about feeling unheard. Don't we all, Your Grace? Eleanor replied quietly. For a moment, the room fell silent. Alexander felt an unexpected pull toward this woman, this governess who seemed to see right through his carefully built walls. It was dangerous. He couldn't afford to let anyone get close. You may start tomorrow, he said abruptly. Mrs. Whitmore will show you to your rooms, and Miss Hayes, he paused as she reached the door. Lady Catherine is not to go near the lake, under any circumstances. Is that clear? Eleanor turned back, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Of course, Your Grace, but may I ask why? Alexander's face went cold. Because I said so. That is reason enough. As Eleanor left the library, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to the Duke's warning than simple caution. And she was right. That night, as Eleanor settled into her small but comfortable room, she stood at the window looking out at the frozen lake. Moonlight made the ice shine like silver, beautiful and mysterious. She couldn't understand why such a lovely place would be forbidden, but then again, she had her own forbidden secrets. The next morning, Eleanor met Lady Catherine for the first time. The little girl was hiding behind a chair in the nursery, her dark hair tangled and her dress wrinkled. She looked exactly like her father, with the same grey eyes and stubborn chin. Go away, Catherine announced. I don't want another governess. They all leave anyway. Eleanor sat down on the floor, making herself smaller and less threatening. Hello, Catherine. I'm Eleanor. And you're right, I might leave too. But not because of you. This unexpected honesty made Catherine peek out from behind the chair. What do you mean? Well, Eleanor said thoughtfully, sometimes grown-ups leave because they're scared, or because they don't understand. But it's never really because of the children. Catherine crept closer. Were you scared when you were little? Eleanor's heart squeezed. Yes, very scared. But I learned that being scared is okay. It's what we do when we're scared that matters. This was the beginning of something beautiful. Catherine, who had been angry and difficult with every other governess, seemed to bloom under Eleanor's patient care. Eleanor didn't try to force the little girl into perfect behavior. Instead, she listened to Catherine's stories about missing her mama, who had died when Catherine was 3. She let Catherine cry when she needed to, and laugh when she wanted to. Duke Alexander watched this transformation with growing amazement. From his study window, he could see Eleanor and Catherine in the garden, building snow forts and chasing each other around the bare winter trees. He hadn't heard his daughter laugh like that since his wife died 4 years ago. But watching Eleanor stirred feelings in Alexander that he had buried long ago. The way she moved with such natural grace, the way she threw back her head when she laughed, the way she seemed to bring light to every room she entered. It was dangerous, these feelings. He had sworn never to love again. Love only brought pain. 2 weeks passed peacefully. Eleanor had settled into the rhythm of life at Ravenswood Manor. She taught Catherine letters and numbers in the morning, but she also taught her about kindness and courage. Catherine was learning to read, but more importantly, she was learning to trust again. Eleanor was also learning things. She learned that the Duke had not always been so cold. Mrs. Whitmore told her stories of the young Alexander, who had once been full of laughter and mischief. Something had changed him, made him build walls around his heart. It was after the accident, Mrs. Whitmore said one evening as they sat by the kitchen fire. When he was just a boy, nearly drowned in that lake, he did. His older brother James tried to save him, but the ice was too thin. They both went under. Eleanor's blood ran cold. What happened? Young Alexander survived, but Master James, Mrs. Whitmore, shook her head sadly. They found his body 3 days later. The Duke blamed himself, said if he hadn't been playing near the water, his brother would still be alive. He's never been the same since. Now Eleanor understood the haunted look in Alexander's eyes, the way he stared at the lake with such pain. He wasn't just afraid of water, he was drowning in guilt. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She found herself thinking about the lonely man who lived in this grand house, carrying the weight of his brother's death for over 20 years. She wanted to help him, to show him that he deserved forgiveness. But how could she, when she had her own terrible secret to hide? The truth was, Eleanor was not just a governess looking for work. She was running from something, someone. And if he ever found her, it wouldn't matter how safe she felt at Ravenswood Manor. Her past would destroy everything. 3 weeks into Eleanor's employment, something happened that changed everything. It was a bitter cold morning in January. The lake had been frozen solid for weeks, covered with a thick blanket of snow. Eleanor was in the schoolroom with Catherine, working on arithmetic, when they heard shouting from outside. Fire! Fire in the stables. Eleanor rushed to the window and saw black smoke pouring from the stable building. Men were running with buckets of water, but the flames were spreading fast, and somewhere in that chaos, she heard the most terrifying sound of all. Catherine screaming. Eleanor spun around, but the little girl was not in the schoolroom. The door was open, swinging in the wind. Catherine must have run outside when she heard the commotion. Eleanor raced down the stairs and out into the freezing air. The scene was chaos. Servants ran everywhere, trying to save the horses and put out the fire. Through the smoke and confusion, Eleanor spotted Catherine standing dangerously close to the burning building, tears streaming down her face. "Moonbeam," Catherine was crying. "Moonbeam is still inside." Moonbeam was Catherine's favorite pony, a gentle grey mare that the little girl loved more than anything. Eleanor could see that the men were focused on saving the valuable breeding horses. No one was going to risk their life for one small pony, except Catherine. The little girl suddenly darted toward the stable entrance. Eleanor screamed and ran after her, but Catherine was fast and desperate. She disappeared into the smoke-filled building just as a burning beam crashed down, blocking the entrance. "Catherine!" Eleanor screamed, but there was no answer. Duke Alexander appeared at Eleanor's side, his face white with terror. "Where is she? Where is Catherine?" "In the stables," Eleanor gasped. She went in after Moonbeam. Alexander stared at the burning building, his whole body shaking. Eleanor could see the battle raging in his mind. His daughter was in there, but to save her, he would have to face his greatest fear. The stable was flooding with water from the firefighting efforts, and he would have to wade through it. "I have to—" He started toward the building, but his legs wouldn't move. 23 years of terror held him frozen in place. Eleanor saw his paralysis and understood. Without thinking, she grabbed his shoulders. "Your Grace, listen to me. Catherine needs you. But if you can't go in, tell me where to find her." "No," Alexander said hoarsely. "You can't. It's too dangerous." But Eleanor was already moving. She grabbed a wet cloth from one of the servants and tied it over her nose and mouth. "The back entrance," Alexander called desperately. "There's a back way through the feed room." Eleanor nodded and ran around the building. The back entrance was smaller but not yet blocked by debris. She could hear Catherine crying somewhere inside, calling for Moonbeam. Eleanor took a deep breath and plunged into the smoke. Inside the stable, the heat was overwhelming. Eleanor could barely see through the thick smoke, and the sound of crackling flames was everywhere. Water sloshed around her ankles. The men had been pouring buckets of it on the fire, but it was also flooding the lower areas of the building. "Catherine," Eleanor called. "Catherine, where are you?" Here came a small, terrified voice. "I can't find her. I can't find Moonbeam." Eleanor followed the voice to the far end of the stable. There was Catherine, standing in front of an empty stall, water up to her knees and rising fast. But more terrifying than the fire or the smoke was what Eleanor saw next. The little girl was trapped. A fallen beam had created a barrier behind her, and the only way out was through the rapidly rising water. Catherine was pressing herself against the back wall, her eyes wide with terror. "I can't swim," Catherine sobbed. "The water is getting higher and I can't swim." Eleanor's heart broke. Catherine was going to drown, just like Alexander's brother had all those years ago. The same tragedy was about to repeat itself, and there was no one to prevent it. Except Eleanor. Without hesitation, Eleanor waded into the deeper water. It was shockingly cold, even through her heavy dress. But she pushed forward, ignoring the fear clawing at her chest. "It's okay, sweetheart," she called to Catherine. "I'm coming. Just hold on to that post, and don't let go." Eleanor was a strong swimmer. She had learned as a child, swimming in the river near her family's old home. But this was different. This was a matter of life and death, with smoke burning her lungs and the very real possibility that the building could collapse at any moment. She reached Catherine just as the water reached the little girl's chest. Catherine was sobbing and shaking, but she threw her arms around Eleanor's neck when she got close enough. "I've got you," Eleanor whispered. "I've got you, darling. We're going to get out of here." But as Eleanor turned to swim back, she realized they had a problem. The water was now too deep for Catherine to walk through, and Eleanor would have to swim while carrying the little girl. It was possible, but it would be difficult and slow, and they were running out of time. The smoke was getting thicker, and Eleanor could hear the ominous creaking of the building's support beams. They had minutes, maybe less, before the whole structure came down. Eleanor made a decision that would haunt her forever. She took off her heavy outer dress, leaving just her chemise, and wrapped Catherine in it to keep her warm. Then she lifted the little girl onto her back. "Hold on tight," she told Catherine. "Whatever happens, don't let go." Eleanor began to swim toward the entrance, Catherine clinging to her back. The water was freezing, and the smoke made it almost impossible to see, but Eleanor kept going, stroke after stroke, fighting against the current created by the water still pouring in. They were halfway to safety when disaster struck. A burning beam crashed down right in front of them, sending up a shower of sparks and creating a new obstacle. Eleanor had to change direction, swimming toward a different part of the building, but this route would take them deeper into the flooded area, where the water was over Eleanor's head. Just then, Eleanor heard something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps splashing through the water behind them. Heavy, desperate footsteps. Catherine, Eleanor. It was Alexander. Despite his terror, despite 23 years of paralyzing fear, he had entered the burning, flooded building to save them. Eleanor turned in the water and saw him wading toward them, his face white with terror but his jaw set with determination. Water was up to his waist, and she could see his whole body shaking, but he kept coming. "Your Grace." "Go back," Eleanor called. "I can get her out." "No," Alexander said firmly, though his voice shook. "Not without both of you." He reached them just as another beam crashed down, this one completely blocking their original escape route. Now all three of them were trapped in the deepest part of the flooded stable, with flames closing in from all sides. Eleanor realized with growing horror that they might not make it out alive. The water was still rising, and there was only one way left to escape, through the main entrance, which meant swimming underwater beneath the fallen debris. "Your Grace," Eleanor said urgently, "can you swim?" Alexander's face went even whiter. "No, I never learned after." He couldn't finish the sentence. Eleanor's mind raced. She could save Catherine. The little girl was small and light. But Alexander was a grown man, and if he couldn't swim, there was no way Eleanor could carry both of them to safety. Unless— "Listen to me," Eleanor said quickly. "Both of you. There's one way out, but you have to trust me completely." She explained her plan. They would have to swim underwater, beneath the fallen beams, to reach the main entrance. Eleanor would go first with Catherine, get her to safety, then come back for Alexander. "No," Alexander said immediately. "I won't let you risk your life twice. And I won't let Catherine die because we're arguing," Eleanor shot back. "Your Grace, your daughter needs you to be brave. Can you do that?" Alexander looked at Catherine, who was clinging to Eleanor's back with complete trust. His daughter believed Eleanor could save them. Maybe it was time he had faith too. "Tell me what to do," he said. Eleanor quickly explained how to hold his breath, how to let her guide him through the water. "Whatever happens, don't panic. Trust me to bring you up when it's safe." She could see the terror in Alexander's eyes, but also something else. Determination, love for his daughter that was stronger than his fear. Eleanor positioned Catherine on her back again. "Ready, sweetheart?" Catherine nodded bravely, though Eleanor could feel her trembling. "I'll be right back for you," Eleanor promised Alexander. Then she took a deep breath and dove beneath the surface. Swimming underwater while carrying Catherine was the hardest thing Eleanor had ever done. The little girl held on with desperate strength, but Eleanor could feel her own lungs burning as she navigated around the fallen debris. The water was murky and full of ash, making it almost impossible to see. Just when Eleanor thought her lungs would burst, they broke the surface near the main entrance. Fresh air hit their faces like a blessing. "Are you okay?" Eleanor gasped to Catherine. The little girl nodded, coughing up water but alive. Eleanor quickly carried her to the entrance where servants were waiting. She handed Catherine to Mrs. Whitmore, then immediately turned back to the water. "Miss Eleanor, no," Catherine cried. "Don't go back in there." But Eleanor was already swimming back toward Alexander. She had promised to save him, and she would keep that promise or die trying. She found Alexander exactly where she had left him, standing chest deep in the rising water. His face was a mask of terror, but he was still there, still waiting for her. "Your turn," Eleanor said, though she was exhausted, and her lungs were still burning from the smoke. Alexander looked at the dark water that had haunted his nightmares for over 20 years. He thought of his brother James, who had died in water just like this. But he also thought of Catherine, safe now because of Eleanor's courage. "I can't," he whispered. "Yes, you can," Eleanor said firmly. "Alexander, look at me." The use of his first name shocked him. No one had called him by his given name in years. "I won't let you drown," Eleanor continued. "I promise you, I will not let what happened to James happen to you." Something in her voice, her absolute certainty, cut through Alexander's panic. He nodded once, then took the deepest breath of his life. Eleanor wrapped her arms around him, and together they went under. Swimming with Alexander was completely different from swimming with Catherine. He was heavy, and his terror made his body rigid and uncooperative. Eleanor had to use all her strength to pull him through the underwater obstacle course of fallen beams and debris. Halfway through, Alexander began to panic. Eleanor felt him struggling, fighting against her grip. They were both running out of air, and his panic was going to get them both killed. Eleanor did the only thing she could think of. She pressed her lips to his, sharing her precious remaining air with him. The kiss was desperate, life-giving, and it seemed to calm Alexander's panic. He stopped struggling and let her guide him. They broke the surface together, both gasping and coughing. Eleanor's strength was completely gone, but she managed to get Alexander to the entrance, where other servants pulled them both to safety. As they lay on the ground outside the burning stable, both shaking and exhausted, Alexander turned to look at Eleanor. Her hair was plastered to her head, her chemise was torn and soaked, and she was covered in soot and ash. She had never looked more beautiful to him. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Eleanor, still catching her breath, managed a weak smile. "You saved yourself. You were braver than you knew." "Catherine," Alexander said suddenly, remembering his daughter. "She's safe," Eleanor assured him. "Mrs. Whitmore has her." Alexander closed his eyes in relief. His daughter was alive. Eleanor was alive. They had all survived what should have been a tragedy. But as the adrenaline faded, reality set in. Eleanor had risked everything to save them. She had shown more courage in one morning than most people showed in a lifetime, and Alexander realized, with a shock that hit him harder than the cold water, that he was falling in love with her. The thought terrified him more than drowning ever had. That evening, after Catherine had been checked by the doctor and put to bed, Alexander found Eleanor in the library. She had changed into a dry dress and braided her damp hair, but he could still see the exhaustion in her eyes. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Tired," Eleanor admitted, "but grateful. We were so lucky." "It wasn't luck," Alexander said quietly. "It was your courage. Catherine would have died if not for you." "I would have died." Eleanor shook her head. "You would have found a way. Love makes us capable of impossible things." "Does it?" Alexander moved closer to her. "Eleanor, what you did today, I've never seen anything like it. You weren't afraid." "I was terrified," Eleanor confessed. "But being afraid doesn't mean you can't act. It just means you choose to act despite the fear." Alexander stared at her, this remarkable woman who had turned his world upside down. "You called me by my given name. In the water." Eleanor blushed. "I'm sorry, Your Grace. I forgot myself." "Don't apologize," Alexander said. I liked hearing you say it." The air between them suddenly felt charged with electricity. Eleanor could feel her heart beating faster, and she saw something in Alexander's eyes that she had never seen before. Warmth, desire, something that looked dangerously like love. "Your Grace," she whispered, "this is not proper." "Nothing about today was proper," Alexander replied. He reached out and gently touched her cheek. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. What I felt today, when I thought I might lose you, it made me realize that I care about you more than I should, more than is wise." Eleanor's breath caught. She had been fighting her own growing feelings for weeks, telling herself it was impossible, that a governess could never be anything more to a duke. But now, looking into his eyes, she saw the same struggle reflected there. "Alexander," she said softly, and the sound of his name on her lips made his heart race. He leaned closer, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I know this is complicated. I know all the reasons why this can't happen. But Eleanor, you dove into that frozen water to save me. You risked your life for mine. How can I pretend I don't have feelings for you after that?" Eleanor closed her eyes, torn between what she wanted and what she knew was right. "We can't," she whispered. "You're a duke. I'm a governess. The world would never accept it." "I don't care about the world," Alexander said fiercely. "Eleanor, you saved my daughter. You saved me. You brought light back into this house. How can social conventions matter more than that?" But even as he spoke, Eleanor was pulling away. The reality of their situation was crashing down on her like cold water. She wasn't just a governess, she was a woman with secrets. Dangerous secrets that could destroy not just her, but Alexander and Catherine too. "Your Grace," she said formally, putting distance between them. What happened today was extraordinary, but it doesn't change who we are. I am employed to teach Catherine, nothing more. Alexander felt the rejection like a physical blow. Eleanor, please, don't shut me out. But Eleanor was already moving toward the door. Good night, Your Grace. I'm glad we're all safe. She left Alexander standing alone in the library, his heart breaking for the second time in his life. But Eleanor's rejection only made Alexander more determined. Over the next few days, he found excuses to be near her. He would appear in the schoolroom to check on Catherine's progress. He would join them for walks in the garden. He would engage Eleanor in conversations about books, about Catherine's education, about anything that would keep her talking to him. Eleanor tried to maintain professional distance, but it was becoming impossible. Every time Alexander looked at her with those storm-grey eyes, she felt her resolve weakening. Every time he smiled at something Catherine said, every time she saw his gentle patience with his daughter, she fell a little more in love with him. And Catherine, innocent as she was, began to notice the tension between them. "Papa smiles more now," she told Eleanor one afternoon as they worked on her letters. "He used to be sad all the time, but now he smiles when you're here." Eleanor's heart squeezed. "Your father has many responsibilities, sweetheart. I'm sure he's always loved you very much. But he's different with you," Catherine insisted with the piercing honesty of childhood. "He looks at you the way Prince Charming looks at Cinderella in my storybook." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Catherine, that's not... Your father and I are not. Will you marry Papa?" Catherine asked suddenly. Eleanor nearly dropped the chalk she was holding. "Catherine, you can't ask such things." "Why not? I like you better than any of the other governesses, and Papa likes you too. I can tell." Eleanor knelt down to Catherine's level, taking the little girl's hands in hers. "Listen to me, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have feelings that are complicated. Your father is a duke, and I'm just a governess. People like us don't marry people like him." "That's silly," Catherine said with the matter-of-fact tone that only children can manage. "If you love each other, why does it matter what other people think?" Out of the mouths of babes, Eleanor thought. If only it were that simple. But that night Eleanor's past caught up with her in the worst possible way. She was in her room, preparing for bed, when she heard a commotion in the courtyard below. Voices, horses, the sound of urgent conversation. Eleanor looked out her window and felt her blood turn to ice. There, dismounting from a travel-worn horse, was the one person she had been running from for months. Lord Marcus Whitfield, the man who had nearly destroyed her life. Eleanor's hands shook as she watched him stride toward the manor's front entrance. She had known this day might come, but she had hoped, she had prayed. A knock at her door made her jump. "Miss Hayes?" It was Mrs. Whitmore. "His Grace requests your presence in the library immediately." Eleanor's heart sank. Marcus had found her, and now he was going to destroy everything she had built at Ravenswood Manor. Alexander would learn the truth about her past, and then he would hate her. Catherine would lose another person she had grown to love, all because Eleanor had been foolish enough to think she could escape her past. With trembling hands, Eleanor smoothed her dress and made her way to the library. She found Alexander standing behind his desk, his face a mask of cold fury. Across from him sat Marcus Whitfield, looking exactly as Eleanor remembered. Handsome in a cruel way, with fair hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to see everything and care about nothing. "Ah, Eleanor," Marcus said as she entered, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "You look well. Country life seems to agree with you." Eleanor lifted her chin, summoning every ounce of courage she possessed. "Lord Whitfield, what brings you to Ravenswood Manor?" "You, my dear," Marcus replied. I've been looking for you for quite some time. Alexander's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Lord Whitfield has made some very serious accusations, Miss Hayes. I think you owe me an explanation. Eleanor felt the room spinning around her. This was it. The moment she had been dreading for months. What has he told you? Marcus smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who had cornered his prey. I've told His Grace the truth about your past employment, Eleanor, about why you really left London so suddenly. Alexander's eyes bored into Eleanor's. Is it true? Were you dismissed from your last position for theft? Eleanor's heart shattered. Marcus had told the same lies he had been spreading in London, the same lies that had forced her to flee the city and take a false name. No, Eleanor said firmly. I was not dismissed for theft. Then explain this, Marcus said, pulling a piece of paper from his coat. Sworn statement from your former employer, Lord Pemberton, stating that jewellery went missing from his household during your employment. Eleanor stared at the paper, knowing it was another of Marcus's fabrications. Lord Pemberton had been Marcus's friend, willing to lie for him to protect his own reputation. It's not true, Eleanor said again, but she could see the doubt growing in Alexander's eyes. Eleanor, Alexander said quietly, if you're innocent, why did you run? Why didn't you stay and fight the charges? This was the question Eleanor had been dreading, because the truth was even more damaging than the lies. She couldn't tell Alexander the real reason she had fled London. She couldn't tell him about the night Marcus had cornered her in Lord Pemberton's library, about how he had forced himself on her, about how she had fought him off and threatened to expose him. She couldn't tell him that the theft charges were Marcus's revenge for her rejection. I ran because I was afraid, Eleanor said finally. It was true, just not the whole truth. Marcus leaned forward. Afraid of facing justice for your crimes? No, Eleanor said desperately. I was afraid of... She looked at Alexander, saw the growing coldness in his eyes, and realized that the truth would only make things worse. A duke would never believe a governess over a lord, and even if he did, he would never want a woman who had been assaulted, who carried that shame. I was afraid no one would believe me, she finished quietly. Alexander stood slowly, his face a stone mask. Miss Hayes, in light of these accusations, I have no choice but to terminate your employment effective immediately. Eleanor felt as if he had struck her. Alexander, please, let me explain. Your Grace, Alexander corrected coldly, and there is nothing to explain. Lord Whitfield has provided evidence of your dishonesty. I cannot have someone of questionable character caring for my daughter. The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. After everything they had shared, everything they had been through, he was choosing to believe Marcus over her. He was throwing away what could have been between them based on lies. Very well, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. I'll pack my things and leave in the morning. You'll leave tonight, Alexander said harshly. I want you gone from this house within the hour. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. She turned to go, but Marcus's voice stopped her. Actually, Eleanor, you'll be coming with me. There are still charges to face in London. Eleanor's blood ran cold. I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm afraid you don't have a choice, Marcus said smoothly. I have a warrant for your arrest. He pulled out another paper, this one bearing official seals. Eleanor stared at it in horror. Marcus had gone to incredible lengths to trap her. He had not only fabricated evidence but had convinced magistrates to issue a warrant based on his lies. Alexander looked from Marcus to Eleanor, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him wanted to protect her, but his duty as a peer of the realm demanded that he respect the law. If there's a warrant, Alexander began reluctantly. No, Eleanor said firmly, I won't go with him. Your Grace, I'm asking for your protection. As your employee, I have the right to appeal to you. Alexander's jaw tightened. Eleanor could see the battle raging inside him. His heart was telling him to protect her, but his mind was telling him that she had betrayed his trust. Eleanor, he said quietly, if you're innocent, you have nothing to fear from a trial. Eleanor laughed bitterly. Don't I? A governess's word against a lord's? We both know how that will end. She was right, and Alexander knew it. The justice system was not kind to people of Eleanor's class, especially when they were accused by their betters. But before Alexander could respond, they heard a sound that changed everything. Papa? Miss Eleanor? What's happening? Catherine appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes sleepily. She had been awakened by the voices and had come downstairs to investigate. Eleanor's heart broke all over again. She had to say goodbye to Catherine, the little girl she had come to love like her own daughter. Catherine, sweetheart, Eleanor said gently, go back to bed. Everything is fine. But Catherine was too smart to be fooled. She looked around the room, taking in the tension, the stranger, her father's cold expression, and Eleanor's obvious distress. Are you leaving? Catherine asked Eleanor directly. Eleanor knelt down to Catherine's level, fighting back tears. Yes, darling, I have to go away. But why? Catherine's voice was small and confused. Did I do something wrong? Are you leaving because I was bad? No, Eleanor said quickly, gathering Catherine into her arms. You could never do anything to make me want to leave you. You're the most wonderful little girl in the whole world. Then why are you going? Catherine demanded, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. Eleanor looked up at Alexander, silently pleading with him to reconsider, but his face remained stone cold. Sometimes adults have to make difficult choices, Eleanor said carefully. But I want you to remember something, Catherine. You are loved. You are precious. And you are brave. Don't ever forget how brave you are. Catherine threw her arms around Eleanor's neck. I don't want you to go. Papa, don't let her go. Alexander's mask slipped for just a moment, and Eleanor saw the pain in his eyes. This was hurting him too, but he was too proud, too afraid of being betrayed again to back down. Catherine, he said firmly, Miss Hayes has to leave. Now go back to bed. No, Catherine said defiantly. If Miss Eleanor goes, I want to go with her. Catherine. Alexander's voice was sharp with pain and frustration. Marcus, who had been watching this family drama with obvious enjoyment, finally interrupted. Touching as this is, we really must be going. I have a long journey ahead of me. Eleanor stood, gently disengaging from Catherine's clinging arms. Give me 10 minutes to pack my things. 5, Marcus said coldly. Eleanor nodded and headed for the door. But Catherine's voice stopped her one more time. Miss Eleanor, you said being brave means acting even when you're scared. So why aren't you being brave now? Eleanor turned back, and the wisdom in that little girl's eyes took her breath away. Catherine was right. Eleanor was running again, just like she had in London. She was letting fear control her actions. But what choice did she have? If she stayed and fought, she would only bring more scandal down on Alexander and Catherine, and she couldn't bear the thought of Catherine seeing her dragged away in chains based on false charges. Sometimes, sweetheart, Eleanor said softly, being brave means knowing when to walk away. It was a lie, and Catherine knew it. The little girl's face crumpled with disappointment and grief. Eleanor hurried to her room, threw her few belongings into her traveling bag, and returned to the library within the allotted 5 minutes. Marcus was waiting by the door, obviously eager to begin his journey back to London. Ready? He asked with false courtesy. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. She looked one last time at Alexander, memorizing his face, storing it away with all the other precious memories from her time at Ravenswood Manor. "Goodbye, Your Grace," she said formally. "Thank you for the opportunity to serve your household." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Eleanor turned to leave, but just as she reached the door, Catherine broke free from Mrs. Whitmore's restraining arms and ran to her. "Please don't go," the little girl sobbed. "Please, Miss Eleanor, I need you." Eleanor knelt down one more time, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I love you, Catherine. Never forget that. And remember what I taught you about being brave." Then she gently extracted herself from Catherine's arms and walked out of Ravenswood Manor, possibly forever. The journey to London was a nightmare. Marcus had brought a closed carriage, and Eleanor was essentially his prisoner. He sat across from her, watching her with those cold blue eyes, occasionally making comments designed to hurt and humiliate her. "You really thought you could hide from me forever?" he asked as they stopped to change horses. "Did you think I would just forget about you?" Eleanor stared out the window, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response. "You should have accepted my original proposal," Marcus continued. "Things would have been so much easier if you had just agreed to be my mistress. But no, you had to play the virtuous maiden. Look where it got you." Eleanor finally turned to face him. "I would rather die than let you touch me again." Marcus smiled his cruel smile. "We'll see about that. You're going to trial, Eleanor. And when you're convicted, you'll have a choice: prison or my protection. I think you'll find my offer more appealing when you're facing years in Newgate." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Newgate prison was a death sentence for someone like her. Women of her class rarely survived more than a few months in that hellhole. But even the thought of prison couldn't make her regret her choice to resist Marcus. She would rather die with her dignity intact than live as his plaything. They reached London late the next evening. Marcus had Eleanor taken directly to a holding cell to await trial. The cell was cold, damp, and smelled of human misery. Eleanor sat on the narrow cot and finally allowed herself to cry. She cried for Catherine, who had lost another person she loved. She cried for Alexander, who would probably never trust another woman. And she cried for herself, for the love she had found and lost, for the life that was slipping away from her. But most of all, she cried because she had not been brave. Catherine had been right. Eleanor had let fear drive her away from the people she loved, and now they were all paying the price. 3 days passed before Eleanor's trial began. Marcus had used his influence to ensure it happened quickly, before Eleanor could mount any real defense. She had no money for a barrister, no witnesses to speak for her character. It was just her word against Marcus's evidence. The trial was a farce from beginning to end. Lord Pemberton testified that jewelry had indeed gone missing during Eleanor's employment. Marcus presented his forged documents with theatrical flair. Eleanor's court-appointed lawyer barely tried to defend her. When Eleanor was asked to speak in her own defense, she stood up with as much dignity as she could manage. "My lords," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, "I am innocent of the charges against me. I never stole anything from Lord Pemberton's household. These accusations are the result of a personal vendetta by Lord Whitfield, who sought to force himself upon me and fabricated these charges when I refused his advances." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Marcus shot to his feet, his face red with rage. "That is a vicious lie," he shouted. "This woman is attempting to destroy my reputation to save herself." The judge, who was clearly one of Marcus's allies, banged his gavel. "The defendant will refrain from making slanderous accusations without evidence." "I have evidence," Eleanor said desperately. the torn dress from that night, the bruises he left on my arms. Mrs. Pemberton's maid saw them. She can testify. Hearsay and speculation. The judge interrupted. The court will not entertain such accusations against a peer of the realm based on the word of a common thief. Eleanor felt her last hope die. The trial was over before it had really begun. The jury deliberated for less than 10 minutes before returning with a guilty verdict. Eleanor Hayes, the judge pronounced, "You have been found guilty of theft in the amount of £50. You are sentenced to 2 years hard labor in Newgate Prison." Eleanor closed her eyes as the words hit her. 2 years in Newgate. She would never survive it. But as the bailiff moved to take her away, a commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. People were pushing aside, making way for someone important. Eleanor turned and felt her heart stop. It was Alexander. The Duke of Ravenswood strode down the center aisle of the courtroom like an avenging angel. He was followed by Mrs. Whitmore, who was carrying a small bundle, and behind them, Catherine. The little girl broke free from Mrs. Whitmore's hand and ran to Eleanor, throwing her arms around her waist. "Miss Eleanor, we came to save you." Alexander reached the front of the courtroom and fixed the judge with a look that could have frozen hell itself. "Your Honor," he said in a voice that commanded absolute attention, "I request a stay of execution of this sentence, pending the presentation of new evidence." The judge looked uncomfortable. Alexander was a duke, which gave him considerable influence even in a court of law. "Your Grace, the trial has concluded. The verdict has been rendered." The verdict was based on incomplete information. Alexander said firmly, "I have evidence that will prove Miss Hayes's innocence." Marcus stood up, his face pale. "Your Grace, surely you don't mean to interfere with the course of justice based on your personal feelings for the defendant?" Alexander turned to Marcus with such cold fury that the other man actually stepped back. "My personal feelings, Lord Whitfield, are that I despise men who use their position to prey on innocent women. Now sit down and be quiet while I present my evidence." The judge, clearly flustered by this turn of events, gestured for Alexander to proceed. Alexander nodded to Mrs. Whitmore, who stepped forward with her bundle. "Your Honor, 3 days ago, Mrs. Whitmore, my housekeeper, came to me with information she felt compelled to share." "Mrs. Whitmore, please tell the court what you told me." Mrs. Whitmore cleared her throat nervously. She had never spoken in a courtroom before, but her loyalty to Eleanor gave her courage. "Your Honor, when Miss Hayes first came to work at Ravenswood Manor, I could see she was troubled about something. She was jumpy, afraid of shadows, the way women get when they've been mistreated." "Objection," Marcus's lawyer called out. "Speculation and hearsay." "I'll allow it," the judge said, curious despite himself. Mrs. Whitmore continued. "When Miss Hayes left so suddenly, I went to pack up her things. That's when I found this." She unwrapped her bundle to reveal a torn and blood-stained dress. "This was hidden in the back of Miss Hayes's wardrobe," Mrs. Whitmore said. "It's torn in a way that suggests violence, and the blood suggests she was injured. But most importantly, there's something else." She held up the dress so the court could see a distinctive cufflink caught in the torn fabric, a cufflink bearing Marcus Whitfield's family crest. The courtroom fell silent. Marcus went white as a sheet. "That proves nothing," Marcus said desperately. "The cufflink could have been planted." "Could it?" Alexander interrupted. He pulled out a piece of paper. "This is a sworn statement from Lord Pemberton's parlour-maid, Mary Hartwell. She testifies that on the night in question, she heard sounds of struggle from the library, followed by Miss Hayes crying. When she investigated, she found Miss Hayes in a state of distress, her dress torn and her arms bruised. Lord Pemberton's wife also saw these injuries and questioned their origin. Alexander looked directly at Marcus. Mary Hartwell also testifies that no jewelry went missing from the Pemberton household. The items Lord Pemberton claimed were stolen were found in their proper places after Miss Hayes left. The judge leaned forward. "Are you saying, Your Grace, that the original theft charges were fabricated?" "I'm saying," Alexander replied coldly, "that Lord Whitfield used his influence with Lord Pemberton to fabricate charges against Miss Hayes in retaliation for her refusal of his unwanted advances. I'm saying that Miss Hayes is the victim here, not the criminal." Marcus shot to his feet. "This is preposterous. You can't believe the word of servants over the testimony of peers." "I believe the evidence," Alexander said firmly, "and the evidence clearly shows that Miss Hayes is innocent of all charges." The judge looked from Marcus to Alexander, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Two peers of the realm were essentially calling each other liars in his courtroom. "Your Honor," Alexander continued, "I formally request that all charges against Miss Hayes be dropped and that Lord Whitfield be investigated for perjury and false imprisonment." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Marcus's supporters were shouting objections, while others were calling for justice. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Through it all, Eleanor stood frozen in shock. Alexander had come for her. After rejecting her, after throwing her out of his house, he had investigated her case and come to save her. "Why?" she whispered to him when the noise died down enough for her to be heard. Alexander looked down at her, and she saw love and regret warring in his storm-grey eyes. "Because Catherine was right. Sometimes being brave means fighting for the people you love, even when you're scared." The judge finally restored order and announced that he was dismissing all charges against Eleanor, pending a full investigation into the evidence presented. Marcus was escorted from the courtroom under guard, his reputation in ruins. Eleanor walked out of the courthouse a free woman, with Catherine holding one hand and Alexander holding the other. But freedom brought its own complications. As they stood on the courthouse steps, Eleanor realized that nothing had really changed. She was still a governess, Alexander was still a duke, and society would never accept their relationship. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Alexander looked down at her, then at Catherine, who was beaming with joy at having Eleanor back. "Now," he said, "we go home. All of us." "Alexander," Eleanor said carefully, "just because I'm innocent of theft doesn't change the other obstacles between us. I'm still the woman I love," Alexander interrupted firmly. "The woman who saved my daughter's life and my own. The woman who showed me what real courage looks like." Eleanor's heart soared, but she forced herself to be practical. "Society will never accept it. Your peers will shun you. Catherine will be looked down upon." "Let them," Alexander said fiercely. "Eleanor, I spent 23 years living in fear. Fear of water, fear of loving again, fear of being vulnerable. But you taught me that love is worth the risk. You dove into that frozen lake to save me, and now I'm diving into this uncertain future to save us." Catherine looked up at both of them with the innocent wisdom that only children possess. "Are you going to marry Miss Eleanor now, Papa?" Alexander smiled, the first real smile Eleanor had seen from him since the day of the fire. "If she'll have me." Eleanor looked at this man who had crossed social boundaries to save her, who was willing to risk everything for love. She thought about the scared little girl who needed stability and love. She thought about her own heart, which had been broken and mended and was now overflowing with hope. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." Catherine cheered and threw her arms around both of them. Alexander pulled Eleanor close and kissed her right there on the courthouse steps, in front of God and all of London society. It was scandalous. It was improper. It was everything a duke wasn't supposed to do. It was perfect. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the chapel at Ravenswood Manor, wearing a simple white dress and a smile that could have lit up the entire county. The ceremony was small, just family and a few close friends who didn't care about social conventions. Catherine served as Eleanor's bridesmaid, beaming with pride as she scattered flower petals down the aisle. Mrs. Whitmore dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief, and even the usually stoic butler was seen to smile. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander kissed Eleanor with all the passion and love he had been holding back for months. The small congregation cheered, and Catherine clapped her hands with delight. "I now present the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood," the vicar announced. "Duchess." Eleanor could hardly believe it. The scared governess who had fled London in disgrace was now the Duchess of Ravenswood, married to the man she loved, and mother to the sweetest little girl in England. But the real miracle wasn't the title or the marriage. The real miracle was what happened later that afternoon. The wedding guests had gathered in the garden for the celebration feast. There was music and dancing and more happiness than Ravenswood Manor had seen in years. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Catherine tugged on Eleanor's skirts. "Duchess Eleanor," she said, trying out the new title, "will you come see something with me and Papa?" Eleanor looked around and realized that Alexander was missing from the party. Catherine led her around the side of the manor, toward the lake that had been the source of so much fear and pain. There, at the edge of the water, Alexander waited. But he wasn't standing on the shore, looking afraid. He was standing waist-deep in the lake, smiling. "Alexander," Eleanor called out, alarmed. "What are you doing?" "Learning to swim," he called back, his voice full of joy and triumph. "My wife is an excellent teacher." Eleanor stared at him in amazement. The man who had been terrified of water for 23 years was standing in the lake, facing his fears head-on. "Will you join me?" he asked, extending his hand toward her. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She kicked off her shoes, lifted her wedding dress, and waded into the water toward her husband. It was cold, but not as cold as it had been that terrible day when she had saved his life. "I'm proud of you," she said when she reached him. "I had a good teacher," Alexander replied, pulling her close. "Someone once told me that being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you act despite the fear." Eleanor laughed, recognizing her own words. "Very wise person, whoever said that." "The wisest," Alexander agreed, and kissed her again. From the shore, Catherine watched her new family with pure happiness. Her papa was no longer afraid. Her new mama would never leave her, and they were all together, facing their fears and finding joy on the other side. The lake that had once held only tragedy and fear now reflected the sunset and the image of a duke and duchess embracing in its waters. It was a new beginning, built on courage and love and the understanding that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow in the places where the deepest pain once lived. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Alexander and Eleanor made their way back to shore, hand in hand. Catherine ran to them, splashing into the shallow water to hug them both. "Are we a family now?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Forever and always," Eleanor promised. "Through every storm," Alexander added. And in the distance, Ravenswood Manor glowed with warm light and the sound of celebration, welcoming home a family that had been born from courage, forged in love, and strengthened by the belief that no fear is too great when faced together. The governess who had once been afraid to love had found her duke. The duke, who had feared the water, had learned to swim. And the little girl who had lost so much had gained a family that would never let her go. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the greatest fears, but when we find the courage to dive deep, when we're willing to risk everything for the people we love, we discover that on the other side of our fears lies everything we've ever wanted. And they all lived happily, bravely, and deeply in love, ever after. If this story touched your heart, please let me know in the comments below. Have you ever had to face your greatest fear for love? And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of courage, romance, and the magic that happens when two hearts refuse to give up on each other. Until next time, remember that true love is always worth the dive.